The food arrives first. Wine fills the cups. Laughter moves across the room. This is not a secret meeting. This is not a crime hidden in the dark. This is a public banquet inside the Palace of Rome. Everyone important is here. Senators, generals, families, wives, daughters. They sit on soft cushions under painted ceilings, surrounded by gold and music. They all know why they were invited. When the emperor stands, no one speaks. No announcement is made. No order is given. He walks slowly around the room, past men who command armies, past names carved into stone. Then he stops. His hand rests on a young girl's shoulder. He does not speak to her. He speaks to her father. No one gasps. No one looks away. No one moves. Because everyone in this room already understands the rule. In this palace, silence is not fear. Silence is survival. What happens next is not written as a scandal. It is not recorded as a crime. It is recorded as attendance. This story is not about one man losing control. It is about a system that taught powerful people how to forget what they saw. It is about how cruelty becomes normal when it is rewarded, and how history learns to call silence order. If you think this is a story about madness, you will miss the truth. This is a story about structure. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. The palace dining hall was built to impress, but that was not its real purpose. It stretched longer than most city streets, lined with marble columns and walls painted with victories Rome liked to remember. Gold lamps reflected off polished floors. Music floated through the air, slow and careful, never loud enough to interrupt a command. Slaves moved silently between couches, carrying wine, fruit, roasted meat, oysters brought fresh from the coast. Everything about the room said abundance. Everything about the room said control. Attendance was not a request. When a messenger arrived with the emperor's invitation, it did not ask if you were free. It told you where to sit and when to arrive. It reminded you of your rank. It reminded you who you were expected to bring. Your wife. Your daughters, if they were old enough. Men who received these invitations understood something important. Declining was not illegal. It did not need to be. In Rome, refusal did not require punishment to be effective. Everyone remembered what happened to families who appeared ungrateful to imperial hospitality. Loss of office. Loss of property. Loss of protection. Sometimes, loss of life. So they came. They arrived early, dressed carefully, smiling when required. They greeted rivals as friends and enemies as allies. They reclined on cushions placed exactly according to status. Who sat closer to the emperor mattered. Who sat farther away mattered just as much. Distance was not comfort. It was vulnerability. Caligula did not rush these evenings. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He watched. He watched how men spoke when relaxed. He watched how wives lowered their eyes. He watched how fathers placed their daughters beside them, then slowly moved them farther away, hoping distance might protect them. He noticed everything. And because he noticed everything, everyone noticed him noticing. The food continued to arrive even when the mood changed. That was important. The appearance of normal life was never allowed to break. Conversations resumed after pauses. Laughter returned, carefully timed. No one wanted to be the one who made the room uncomfortable. Discomfort drew attention. Attention was dangerous. When Caligula stood and walked through the hall, No guard announced him. He did not need permission to move. His steps were unhurried. He passed generals who had crushed rebellions, senators whose names filled the records, men who had judged others from high benches. None of that mattered here. He stopped when he chose. When his hand rested on a woman's shoulder, or a girl's, the room did not react. That silence was not confusion. It was understanding. Everyone there had learned the same lesson. What happens next is not an event. It is a process. A servant would appear. A quiet word would be spoken. The woman would rise. Her husband would remain seated. This was the true function of the banquet. Not celebration. Not excess. Documentation. Every person present saw. Every person present stayed. That was the point. Attendance turned witnesses into participants. Participation turned fear into complicity. No laws were announced. No rules were written. They were demonstrated. And once demonstrated, they did not need to be repeated. This was how power educated Rome. Silence in Rome was not empty. It was exchanged. Every man in the dining hall understood the trade, even if no one spoke of it directly. When a woman stood and followed a servant away from the table, the transaction had already taken place. Nothing had been signed. Nothing had been promised out loud. But everyone knew the terms. Silence bought survival. A senator who stayed quiet kept his seat. A general who looked away kept his command. A family that endured remained a family. The empire did not ask for belief. It asked for compliance. After the woman left the room, the food did not stop. Wine continued to flow. Musicians played. Conversations resumed, slowly at first, then more freely as the minutes passed. This return to normal was not accidental. It trained the room. It taught everyone how quickly the unthinkable could become routine. Men learned when to speak again. They learned which jokes were safe. They learned how to smile without revealing fear. The emperor understood something important about power. Fear alone does not last. Fear exhausts people. It makes them reckless. But reward creates memory. Reward creates habit. Some men were promoted after these evenings. Some received land. Some were given contracts or honors. Others received nothing at all. And that uncertainty was the point. If silence always led to reward, men might calculate together. If silence always led to punishment, they might resist together. But when silence led sometimes to gain and sometimes to nothing, each man stood alone. No one could compare outcomes. No one could trust another's experience. Isolation became policy. A man whose wife had been taken and returned learned to study the emperor's face afterward. A nod might mean favor. Indifference might mean danger. A joke might mean survival. Every interaction became a test. Some men tried to protect themselves in small ways. They sent their wives away before invitations arrived. They claimed illness or family obligations. They delayed travel. These strategies worked briefly, until they did not. When women did not appear, questions followed. Proof was demanded. Excuses were inspected. Failure to attend was redefined as disrespect. And disrespect in Rome had consequences. One man seated his wife between older women, hoping visibility would protect her. The emperor noticed. The attempt itself became an offense. The punishment was not immediate. That too was deliberate. The delay allowed fear to spread. It allowed the lesson to be absorbed. What mattered was not the woman's absence or presence. What mattered was the emperor's awareness. Over time, something worse than fear took hold. Rationalization. Men began to tell themselves stories. They said the emperor was unpredictable. They said resistance would only make things worse. They said their families depended on them. They said history would judge him, not them. These thoughts were not imposed. They were cultivated. Silence became easier when it was framed as responsibility. When enduring was described as duty. When compliance was renamed as protection. And so the banquets continued. Each evening added another layer. Another witness. Another memory no one could safely speak of. The palace did not need chains. It used shared knowledge. Once enough people had seen, once enough people had stayed, exposure itself became control. No one needed to be reminded anymore. They remembered. At first, the banquets felt like events. Something shocking. Something to survive. But systems do not rely on shock. They rely on repetition. As the months passed, attendance became routine. Invitations arrived regularly. The same families appeared again and again. The same rooms were used. The same rituals repeated. Over time, the horror did not disappear. It settled. It became part of the structure of Roman political life. The palace began keeping records. Names were written down. Who attended? Who arrived late? Who left early? Who brought whom? These lists were not punishment. They were insurance. A man who had been present could never say he did not know. A man who had stayed silent could never claim innocence. Witnesses became hostages to their own memory. The emperor did not need to threaten them. The records did that work quietly. The most powerful form of control was shared guilt. Some men were rewarded openly. Others were mocked. A few were fined or quietly removed from office. The randomness confused everyone. Patterns could not be predicted. Safety could not be guaranteed. Every decision became personal, isolated, private. That isolation prevented unity. If a group of senators had refused together, the system might have cracked. But the system was designed to prevent exactly that. Each man feared being the only one to refuse. Each man feared being noticed. Each man waited for someone else to act first. No one did. Families began adapting. Some women arrived dressed carefully, aware of the unspoken expectations. Some families treated selection as advantage. Being noticed by the emperor could be reframed as influence. Humiliation was repackaged as access. This adaptation was not celebration. It was survival logic. Marriage contracts began to change. Language shifted. Duties to the state appeared where they had not before. Clauses were added that allowed families to distance themselves from consequences. Rome was not only tolerating the system, it was writing it into daily life. Money followed fear. Families borrowed heavily to offer gifts. Estates were sold to purchase favor. Interest rates rose for those believed to be in danger. Silence spread beyond the palace into the markets, the courts, the countryside. The empire adjusted itself around the behavior of one man because the structure allowed it. Violence was still present, but it was no longer the main tool. Fear had been replaced by calculation. Men weighed risks instead of rights. They asked not, "Is this wrong?" but "What will this cost?" The palace became a place of negotiation. And once power becomes negotiable, it no longer needs justification. By the time the system was complete, fear no longer looked like fear. It looked like discipline. Men arrived at the palace knowing exactly how to behave. They knew when to speak and when to stay quiet. They knew which parts of the room were safe and which were not. They knew that attention from the emperor was never neutral. It was either an invitation or a warning. The banquets no longer shocked anyone. That was the most dangerous change of all. When something terrible happens once, people remember it. When it happens again and again, people adjust. They tell themselves it is temporary. They tell themselves it is not their responsibility. They tell themselves there is no alternative. Caligula understood this better than anyone. He did not rely on constant cruelty. He alternated. One evening would pass without incident. Another would not. Some families would leave untouched for months. Others would be summoned again and again. The uncertainty kept everyone alert. The routine kept everyone tired. Fear that never rests eventually becomes habit. Men who once lay awake at night replaying what they had seen now spoke of it less. Not because it hurt less, but because speaking served no purpose. Silence became practical. Silence became efficient. Even the guards adjusted. They stood at doors. They escorted women down corridors. They returned them to the dining hall. They saw everything. They said nothing. Their role was not to judge. It was to maintain order. Order was defined by obedience. Obedience was rewarded with pay, position, and protection. The palace taught everyone the same lesson, at different levels. To senators, your power exists only by permission. To soldiers, loyalty is measured in silence. To families, survival requires adaptation. There were moments when resistance seemed possible. Whispers passed between men in private villas. Complaints were shared in low voices. But these conversations never became plans. Plans required trust. Trust did not exist in a system built on observation. Anyone could be listening. Anyone could be reporting. Anyone could be hoping for favor. Fear did not need to be enforced anymore. It maintained itself. The most effective systems do not need constant violence. They rely on memory. On the knowledge that something happened before and can happen again. On the understanding that nothing will protect you if it does. By this point, the banquets were no longer about desire or impulse. They were about demonstration. They showed the room who controlled access, who controlled futures, who controlled silence. Power no longer needed explanation. It had become normal. Systems like this do not collapse all at once. They crack quietly. By the final months of Caligula's rule, many men were exhausted. Not outraged. Not defiant. Exhausted. Living under constant calculation wears people down. Every invitation required preparation. Every conversation required caution. Every expression required control. But exhaustion alone does not create resistance. What changed was not morality. It was proximity. The same patterns used against senators began to turn inward. Guards who had enforced silence became targets of mockery. Officers who had obeyed without question were humiliated publicly. The message shifted. It was no longer only, endure. It became, you are replaceable. That was dangerous. A system built on silence depends on clear roles. When those roles blur, loyalty weakens. Men who had watched others suffer now saw themselves reflected in that suffering. And for the first time, silence felt unsafe. There were no speeches. No meetings. No declarations of justice. Just a few men who understood that waiting would change nothing. When the end came, it was not theatrical. It was quick, confused, brutal. The emperor died in a corridor, not a courtroom. There was no trial, no public reckoning, no apology to those who had endured. And when the news spread, Rome did not celebrate. It debated procedure. The Senate argued about restoring old systems, old freedoms, old names. But debate without power is performance. The decision was made elsewhere. Soldiers chose stability. Payment mattered more than principle. A new emperor was declared within hours. The palace remained. The guards remained. The banquets would return. What had broken was not the structure, only the man. There were no investigations into what had happened. No records opened. No witnesses called. The system protected itself by pretending the problem had been singular, by calling it madness, by erasing the name. Silence was rewarded again. The women were not asked what they remembered. The families were not questioned. History moved forward carefully, avoiding uncomfortable details. Absence became explanation. Gaps in records replaced testimony. The empire did what it had always done best. It survived. After the emperor was gone, Rome faced a choice it never truly considered. It could ask questions, or it could restore order. Order 1. Statues were pulled down. Names were scratched from stone. Official records were changed. Decrees were cancelled. Caligula was declared unworthy of memory. This punishment had a purpose. It did not honor victims. It protected the system. If the emperor was erased, then responsibility disappeared with him. The Senate spoke of stability. Writers spoke of madness. Future historians would describe excess, cruelty, and insanity. These words were safer than structure, safer than design, safer than admitting that hundreds of powerful men had seen and stayed. The banquets were remembered as stories, not procedures. The women were remembered as rumors, not people. The silence was remembered as fear, not policy. This framing mattered. If everything could be blamed on one man, then Rome itself remained innocent. The empire could continue without changing how power worked. The palace could remain untouched. The guards could remain loyal. The system could continue with better manners. And it did. The next rulers learned from the performance. They were quieter, less theatrical. They avoided drawing attention. The cruelty did not end. It simply became less visible, less documented, easier to deny. The women who survived were not asked to speak. Some remarried. Some vanished from records. Their names appear briefly, then disappear. A marriage noted, then dissolved. A dowry returned. A life reduced to a line, then silence. History often mistakes silence for absence. But absence leaves patterns. Missing names. Broken family records. Sudden transfers of property. Careers that rise without explanation. These are not accidents. They are traces. The truth is not hidden because it lacks evidence. It is hidden because it implicates too many people. Admitting what happened would require admitting how easily power trains obedience. How quickly morality bends when survival is at stake. How systems reward forgetting. Rome did not fall because of cruelty. It endured because of it. And that is the lesson history hesitated to teach.